Okay, so let's jump right in. Have you ever noticed how many churches seem to have way more women than men, like every Sunday? It's pretty striking, right?
Yeah, it's a real pattern. And the interesting thing is, it's not always about getting new people in the door. It's about why men who might already be part of the church, sometimes they kind of drift away.
It's true. And that is exactly what we're digging into today. We're talking about engaging men in Caribbean churches. And our guide is Michael McAnuff Jones and his book, Get Five, Reach Many.
Yeah.
And by the way, this guy has such a cool background. He's a pastor, obviously, but he's also a researcher, A&D. He's got experience in human resources.
Right, like who better to write this book, right? He really brings all those perspectives to the table.
Totally.
Yeah.
And he uses Jamaica as a case study, which is really insightful. But I'm telling you, some of his ideas really surprised me. Like, you know how churches often try to make themselves more appealing to men, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, McAnuff Jones is like, hold on a second. What if we've got it all wrong?
And that's where his whole get them out principle comes in, right? He's
Mhm.
basically saying if you want men to be a part of the church, you've got to get them out of the church building first.
I know. It sounds counterintuitive, but then when you think about it,
Yeah.
it's kind of brilliant. It's like, meet them where they are
Yeah.
instead of trying to force them into a mold that might not fit.
Exactly. And he digs into all these deep-seated ideas about what it means to be a man, especially in a Caribbean context. Like he talks about the influence of Rastafarianism, which some see as the opposite of traditional church.
Totally. Like this whole idea of church being a woman's space full of, emotions and, well, you get the idea. But a lot of men, they crave that sense of action and brotherhood, real talk, but outside the church walls, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and McAnuff Jones doesn't just talk about it in theory. He brings in some pretty powerful statistics about what's actually happening in Jamaica. And well, frankly, it's kind of alarming when you look at the rates of male violence, absentee fathers, things like that. He paints this picture of a society that really desperately needs more positive male role models.
And he sees the church as being so important for turning that tide.
Absolutely. He says the church has a vital role to play. But, and this is a big but, he says, before we even get to the spiritual stuff, the church has to meet men where they are, address their real life issues and struggles. You can't just jump straight into the spiritual without laying that groundwork.
So when he says get them out, does he mean like no more Sunday service? Is that what he's getting at?
No, no, not at all. It's more like he wants churches to think outside the box, like there are other ways to connect with men besides just the traditional Sunday service.
Okay, that makes sense.
He talks of organizing different things like community events or sports leagues, even just casual get-togethers, just giving men a chance to connect, but in a more relaxed setting.
Instead of robes and hymns, it's more like dominoes and, I don't know, whatever else men do when they hang out. Right?
Right, exactly. He says you got to speak their language.
I like it. It's practical.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, like, is it enough to just hang out? How do you go from that to, like, the deeper conversations, the spiritual growth, all that?
That's where the other parts of his Get T5 model come in. So remember, get them out. Well, the next one is get them up.
Okay, get them up. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So Get Them Up focuses on personal and professional growth, like offering things like skills training, financial literacy workshops, that kind of thing, even mentorship programs.
Oh, I like that a lot. It's recognizing that men have needs and goals that go beyond just the spiritual, right? You're meeting practical needs, which I think shows that the church can be a resource in all areas of life, not just on Sundays, if that makes sense.
You're showing them you care about their whole selves.
Exactly. Okay, so we're building relationships, we're offering opportunities, but how do you actually get men to open up? To talk about their struggles, their doubts, all that stuff that guys don't always like to talk about.
He calls that stage Get Them Talking. And this is where it gets really interesting because he talks about how important it is to create these safe spaces, where men feel comfortable being vulnerable.
Yeah, I can see that. So it's not just about offering programs, it's about building trust.
Right.
Making sure they know it's okay to not be okay, which can be tough for guys sometimes.
It can be, and he gives some great examples of how to do that. He talks about having men's support groups or even town hall style meetings where they can share openly. Sometimes just having a designated time for sharing during those more casual gatherings can make a big difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like even just knowing they're not alone, that other guys are going through similar stuff, that can be huge.
It can be huge. He says a problem shared is a problem halved. But then sometimes it's not just about sharing, right? Sometimes those problems need more.
Right, they need actual help.
Exactly. And that's where he brings in get them over.
Get them over. Okay, lay it on me. What does that look like in practice?
So McAnuff Jones, he's really passionate about the church being proactive here. He talks about offering counseling services or connecting men with support groups, really getting them the resources they need to actually overcome those
I
challenges.
see. So it's kind of like this whole Giddy 5 model. It's almost like a funnel, right?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. You start broad with these external activities, like getting men out in the community, and then each step draws them closer to the core, to a place where they're ready for that spiritual growth that get them in stage.
You got it. And I think that's such an important point you just made because it really challenges the traditional way of thinking about church.
Totally.
It's
Like
a-
usually it's like, come as you are, but you better be ready to change once you're here. But McAnuff Jones is saying, no, let's meet them where they are, address their needs, and let the spiritual stuff unfold more naturally.
Exactly. He says, understand their practical and emotional needs first, and then the spiritual element will follow.
And you know what this makes me think about?
That's that.
Mentorship. Because I know McAnuff Jones talks a lot about that. And it seems like that could be woven throughout all these different stages.
Absolutely. He's a huge proponent of mentorship. In fact, there's a whole chapter in the book dedicated to it. He talks about how crucial it is, both from a biblical perspective and just practically speaking. He even shares his own experience implementing a mentorship program at his church.
Oh, really? And how did that go? Like, what stood out to you about his approach to mentorship? Do you remember what stood out to you about his approach to mentorship? Was there anything unique about it?
I think what really struck me was how much he emphasized that mentorship isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Like, he talks about all these different types of mentorship.
What? Give me some examples.
Sure. So you've got your more traditional spiritual guidance, which is obviously important, but he also talks about things like career advice or even just having someone who will listen without judgment, just be a sounding board.
That's so key, though, right? Just having that person you can be real with no matter what. It's about recognizing that everyone's different, everyone's got different needs and experiences, and it's about finding that person who can meet them where they are.
100%. And he gives some really practical advice on how to actually make that happen in a church setting.
Yeah, because I feel like mentorship can sound kind of formal,
Mhm.
like you need some big program or something.
Right. But sometimes the most powerful connections are the ones that just happen organically. Like he talks about setting up a system where the older, more experienced guys are paired with younger men and just creating those opportunities for them to connect, either one-on-one or maybe in small groups.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's creating that space for those relationships to grow. And you know what I love about that? It's those ripple effects, right? It's not just about the two guys who are paired up. It's the impact it can have on their families, on the community as a whole, even on future generations.
Oh, absolutely. And that ties right back into McAnuff Jones's whole thing about addressing the fatherhood crisis that's happening in Jamaica.
Yeah, because you can't talk about engaging men
Yeah.
without talking about fatherhood, right?
Yeah.
It's such a crucial part of the equation.
For sure. And he makes a really strong case that strong, present fathers are vital, not just for families to be healthy, but for a healthy society overall. And he sees the church as having this incredibly important role to play in equipping men, in empowering them to actually step into that role and to do it well.
It's such a powerful call to action. And it makes you realize this isn't just about, like, filling up pews on a Sunday morning, right? It's bigger than that. It's about equipping men to live out their faith, but not just within the church walls. It's in their homes, in their communities, everywhere.
Totally. And what I love about McAnuff Jones's approach is he's really challenging the traditional church model in a good way, of course. But he's basically saying, let's stop trying to force these square pegs into round holes.
Right. Like, let's meet men where they are, figure out what they need, and then empower them to be the best versions of themselves.
Exactly. It's such a refreshing take, and I think it's something that churches everywhere could learn from.
Well said. Well, we have covered so much ground today. But if you're listening and thinking, okay, this is great, but where do I even start? What's one thing, just one concrete step that someone could take, like this week, to start engaging men in their community in a more meaningful way?
If I had to pick just one, I'd say start by having a conversation. Like reach out to a few guys in your church and just ask them, what would make you feel more seen, more valued, more supported? Just that simple question could spark some really amazing changes.
Love it. Sometimes the simplest actions are the most powerful. Well, this has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I've learned so much. For anyone listening who wants to dig even deeper into McAnuff Jones's Get T5 model, his insights on mentorship, all of it, I highly, highly recommend checking out his book, Get 5, Reach Many.
Couldn't agree more. It's incredibly insightful and practical, and I have a feeling you'll be coming back to it again and again.
Definitely. Well, on that note, until next time, keep asking those curious questions. Keep diving deep into the things that really matter to you.
And we'll be here to help you unpack it all.